Welcome to the Color Authority podcast. This is Judith podcasting out of Milan, Italy. And today I'm going to be interviewing Ruxandra Duru. She researches, documents, and experience with color, beauty, and mood. She currently lives and works in New York City. A third culture person, as she was born in Romania, spent her childhood in Morocco, moved during her teens to Canada, and in her mid-20s to Barcelona, Spain, where she resided until 2021. She worked in the editorial graphic design field until 5 years ago, when she became increasingly interested in how colors, among other properties, can create different atmospheres and improve our well-being in a variety of contexts, including graphic design, art, and architecture. On top of her own practice, she also uses her color knowledge at Google New York City. Additionally, she makes music and takes photographs, spaces where mood is also an important element. Good morning, Ruxandra. How are you today? And welcome to the Color Authority.
Hi, I'm very nice to meet you. I'm really, really happy to be here. I'm doing great today.
I have had this podcast for a while now. And when I came across your profile, you reached out actually to me and I saw your profile. I'm like, this is a girl I have to interview. So thank you so much for being here. And I think in the meantime, if you've listened, there was always that very first same question that is for everybody. And I'd like to know your answer to that question too, which is, what is color?
It is a great question to start with. Well, to me, what it really means is I think of it as a gut reaction, really like an immediate emotional reaction that I can feel in my body, and specifically kind of in the area of the belly, the gut. It's really something I can almost physically feel. And even though when I work with color palettes, I really like to try to analyze them in a kind of more rational way, trying to find the theory behind why is this working, why is it not working. But what I really trust the most is that like really immediate feeling that I have. If I work on a color palette and I look at it, I'm like, and I feel like, yes, immediately. I feel like a big yes in my body. Like, okay, this is going in the right direction. And if it's like, nah, then I'm like, okay, so it's not working. Even though if rationally it's supposed to work, that first reaction is like what really matters. And from the yeses, obviously, there's a variety of yeses. There's like more different types of like effects that color can have on you. It can really uplift you. You can feel like almost like a bittersweetness, like something deep. But there are all these emotions that I feel like very strong. Like yes, I really try to follow that. So definitely, it's something in the gut for me.
It's intuition, right? I think most people would call it, their emotions, the intuition. Do you think people can learn that, to listen to what they're actually feeling? And this can be done with many things, of course, in life. But with color, you think that's something that you learn, or you think it's something you were literally born with?
Obviously, I think we all are drawn to different things naturally. Maybe there's people who are drawn maybe to sound and more sensitive to that, and others who are more drawn to visuals, or I personally was drawn to color kind of my whole life in a subtle way. So I think the more time you spend with something, the more you can feel like that, listen to that reaction that is more of a intuitive reaction, as you're saying, and not as a rational one, because I feel like we go to that immediately for many things. And sometimes it's not the right answer. But I feel like, if you have an interest and if you spend a lot of time really helps observing and going back to it. At least that's what worked for me.
I think indeed it's time. I think also when I started in color, I saw color and I saw many differences in color. But over the last couple of years, working even more intensely in color, I see even more differences. And I see even different color combinations. And I think it is indeed, it's the intuition part. I think it is a little bit innate, but I think you can learn a lot about color just by working with it, right?
Yes. More time you spend on something. And it's funny for me. I remember working with color through various years and going back to things that I liked before. I thought they were working, and I look back at it, I'm like, actually, it's lacking something. So it evolves. It evolves, definitely.
We change. I mean, we change as persons.
We change. Exactly. That's true.
Also, because until a couple of years ago, you once said also in an interview, you used color as a secondary tool, which I think is still what a lot of people do. They look at shape, they look at design, and then at a certain point, it's like, oh wait, color. You know, what changed? What convinced you to use that power of color?
Well, I think it wasn't immediate change. It wasn't like from one day to the next. As I was saying before, like color really I was drawn to color throughout my life. When I was a kid, I used to paint and draw a lot, like many kids were drawn to the arts. And my parents loved the Impressionists and the post-Impressionists. So we would see a lot of that type of art. And I would copy a lot of those paintings. I was pretty good at copying for some reason. So I would paint all the combinations of colors they used. And I felt like it was really something that really, really delighted me. Obviously, I didn't think that was a job at that time. But fast forward maybe like 10, 15 years, I worked in the publishing industry, working with book covers. And when you work with book covers, it's really important. The mood is really important. So you try to transmit what's happening in the book, especially fiction books, and color really helps with that. So I realized that I was also really enjoying using color for that purpose. And when I had to like a collection or something that had to be differentiated by colors, I'd be like, okay, give me 10 hours and I'd just be doing color. So definitely I would sense that there's something here. And slowly I realized that I slowly started paying attention to like that interest. I realized, okay, I'm interested in color, but it's in all different sorts of contexts. I would look at a person's clothing. I would look at architecture. I would look at objects and images online, so many images online. And I would be like, oh, this really moves me somehow. And this other image, oh yes, and here and here. So first thing I did, I started compiling them. I used Pinterest for like, I don't know, 12 years, 13 years. I hope they never shut down my account because so much gold in there for me. It's like a kind of a repository of my what really moves me. So I would collect those images with color that really moved me somehow. And sometimes it was really subtle, like really subtle contrast or photography. I don't know. And then at some point I realized, okay, maybe I can do something with color, like something myself, not just observe. So the first thing I did was to do a little blog where I would share these images and I would kind of say, okay, so look at this image. And I love the contrast of this red with this very close red or orange here. And try to understand why was it working. But back to your question, when I really started kind of really understanding its powers, when I started really experimenting with it. So I started this experiment of pairing pieces of paper, very basic. It's very cheap and very basic, just taking colored paper and combining two pieces of color and trying to understand what is happening in that reaction between those two colors that makes it work beautifully or makes it go on, that a reaction that I had before. So I did so many of those tests, thousands, and I kept hundreds of those. It's basically, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, it's like basically a little square that is, I would say maybe 6 centimeters.
They look similar to the Joseph Albers cards, right? If anybody's ever done the Joseph Albers shop, that's a similar shape, right, of cards that you use.
Well, I cut them myself, actually. It's very small. And it's funny that you said that. Initially, I used paper and then I added also the silk screen used by Albers to add more colors. But yeah, when I was working with these it's tiny, it's small, it's very small. But I would work on this on a table. It was also during COVID. I had more time. And I would go back the next day and find these combinations on the table and I would see a few immediately and it would really create something in me like, wow, that's that movement in me. And I'd be like, wow, this is so powerful. And it's just 2 pieces of color in a paper. Like it's really insignificant. So I thought if this can have this power in me, like this small combination, it potentially could have an impact on other people. So that's when I had that realization.
Color can make a day or it can break a day or it can change somebody's mood. Do you really think that it has that power?
Well, obviously maybe not by itself, I would say, though I can think of, that question makes me think of those immersive art installations that are really heavy on color. So let's say there's this artist called Veronica and Jensen's. I think I'm saying that correctly. And you would go into a space and it would be filled with a smoke, white smoke. So she would color that space, I think, with light. And then you would really be immersed in color, basically. So it's really, wow, a very specific, unique place where you'd be really immersed in color and there wouldn't be nothing else. Or I'm thinking of the Weather Project by Olafur Eliasson. I haven't seen it. I don't know if you're familiar with that one at the Tate. I would have loved to see it. So it's basically that gigantic room with a sun-looking screen and everything bathed in that warm gold light. So I imagine those kind of experiences really stay with you. Or I'm thinking in a kind of smaller scale in day-to-day life, if you are in a room that's painted, everything is painted, even the ceiling. I love those rooms that have, even the ceiling is painted in a color. It's really like a cocoon. You really like enveloped in that color. I feel like it can have more of an effect. Or if you're wearing an outfit that makes you look really good, and that the colors that really stay with you, and you're wearing that the whole day, I think it can have an impact. And obviously there are other things that influence that. If you can, it's never color alone. You have light, you have shape, you have finish, you have, is it a gradient, or is it like are the colors together? Are they separate? Are they touching? It's so hard to grasp. Color is frustratingly like uncontrollable, very hard to control, I find. And that really influences if it has that impact on your mood. And that's actually why I started opening up and going from color and started extending a little bit other things, light, the materials. How does that add an additional kind of stimulation for your eyes, and how does that, in conjunction with color, create different moods? But I do feel that it's still worth trying using color in the best possible way, because imagine you're in a day and then maybe a color combination or something in your environment makes you feel more comfortable or more nurtured, and maybe sometimes we're just a line away from one decision or the other that changes your life. So anything that can nurture you, it's always great to be able to add that. If you can add beauty and to add inspiration through color, maybe in the long run, there's just like small decision that be like, well, today I'm not going to binge on this TV show. I'm going to write to this friend or this friend. And then I don't know. So I feel like sometimes it's worth even focusing on the smaller things or the more subtle things like color.
That's also why, so to help people with creating the right color moods, but also using the right color, the color combinations, of course, that are super important, because as you said, it's not just one color or two colors. It's many aspects that actually influence how a color can make you feel. You created a color generator that is suggesting pairs of colors against a selected amount of stimulation. Now, if I just read that, I'm like, what? Can you explain what this tool is, and also how people may use it?
Yes. So let me tell you a little bit about the background of this tool. So it's called Color Moods. You can find it at colormoods.co. And it's basically a color generator that, as you were saying, generates pairs of colors based on how stimulated you want to be by those pairs of colors. And this project actually started with those color pairings I was mentioning earlier. So I was paying attention to this color combination and be like, oh, what is this making me feel? Why is this making me feel this other thing? Why is this one cringy? Why is this one like boring? Why is this one perfect? So I remember reading a book at that time. I was just reading so much about color, anything I could find about color, about how the environment influences you. I found that really fascinating. So I read this book by Ingrid Fettel-Lee. It's called Joyful. And part of the book is also about how bright colors, that as she talks about, that environments are very understimulating, like at work and different spaces, like we need more pops of color. And she was talking about that idea of stimulation as a way to really improve people's lives. So I thought, this is an interesting approach. I hadn't thought of that. Let's see, what could I use this term of this approach to look at color combinations, at least two. I started with two. People might ask, like, why two? I started small because I wanted to understand how it works with two first before moving to more colors. So I thought, okay, how can I apply this term stimulation to two colors? So I looked at them and I realized, obviously, the intensity of the two colors together? Are these two very bright colors? Are they generally more subtle? Obviously, that makes you, more excited or more calm, depending on that. The difference of the hues, how far apart are they? That's also, the more contrasting they are, the more exciting it's also for your eyes. And if they're really close by, like analogous colors, then you have kind of a more gentle feel, very harmonious, but also softer. But what I realized that I wasn't looking at as much is like the light dark contrast. Or like how dark or light are colors. It's easy to think, oh, this is yellow, this is green. But what's happening? How dark? Like if we see those colors in black and white, what are we seeing? Because actually I read that we see both in color and black and white. Like there's like two channels in our brains or something like that. And they kind of overlap in a way. And so it's also like, okay, what is simulating that other channel? So generally it's the more contrast, the harder it feels, the harsher it feels. So there's that I took into account. And then also something that happens a lot and with flat surfaces touching is that you could have this thing called vibration when actually there's no light dark contrast. And it's like, ooh, and colors are very bright and different from each other, but they don't have a lot of light dark contrast. It will create this kind of vibration that is actually very stimulating, but very bothersome. So I was like, okay, this is also something to take into account. Maybe this is the end of the spectrum, like the highest one. They're like, okay, this is too much, but I think it's interesting to study it. Sorry, it's a long answer, but I after that, I kind of realized, oh, maybe this is interesting. So I put it into words. Put it into an article. I wrote an article on Medium. You can self-publish that. And I love doing that. It's just a way to transmit information to other people. And I find that writing really organizes my thoughts. Like it really makes you, okay, what are you trying to say? How can you transmit this to another person so that they don't like, what are you talking about? So try to put that into words clearly. And I shared it with the Word. And a friend of mine reached out. He's a programmer and a designer. His name is Brian Lee. And he said, we could do a tool with this, like a digital tool for people to go in. And then they would be like, okay, what kind of mood am I looking for? One would be like really excited, like do I want something really that's breaking my eyes? Or do I want something really, really soft? And start with that. And then you would have kind of a bar, the stimulation bar that would kind of guide you and suggest pairings for you. So this is what we did. And right now, if you go to the tool, you end up in a place where obviously everything is, we wanted to have a landing page that explains all this in case people are like, what is this simulation thing? What are you talking about? So it's kind of open. It's like transparent in that way. And if you go to the tool itself, you have that bar, you have like a place where you can actually see one of the color pairings that maybe you're working with that is very enlarged and very immersive, like the whole page is just those two colors. And I find that really fascinating. To me, I just do screenshots after screenshots after screenshots. And I think, oh, this one is so lovely. Oh, this one is so beautiful. I use it so much personally. It's just, I'm the best user. That's the best thing. Like things that you do use yourself, I think are the best tools. And lastly, I would say like the one thing that I think it's helpful is that you can actually, once you kind of hone in what kind of mood you're looking for, maybe you're looking for some colors, you see some colors that you like, you can lock it and then it will generate additional color pair, like a second color will be paired with that locked color in that same range of stimulation or excitement or mood that you have selected. So that one really works because it's like, maybe I don't want this green with this orange, but what about this green with this, I don't know, a darker brown or something like that. So there's, I think that part works really nicely for people to find pairings.
So let's say that generally what you've discovered is the more intense and contrasting the colors, the more stimulating they apparently are. And then the less contrasting they are, the more calming. So this is also depending on what an architect, a designer, whatever effect they want to reach in a space, that's how they can work with colormodes.co,
yes.
Right?
Yes, I think I like that idea of starting with something big, like the effects, and that again is very, it can be a little personal. I think it's a little bit more universal, as we could agree that very, like the lower end of the simulation range, if we go in the tool, most people, I think, would agree that's kind of a more dulling and soft effect. And the other one, I think there's some, and the end of it will be more exciting. So I think that I like that idea of kind of universality, of finding something a little bit bigger. And then people can go in and be like, okay, well, I'm looking for this, but maybe they have this idea that these colors will work, but suddenly they think, well, actually, I thought I liked this, but surprisingly, I'm drawn to this. And I like that idea of kind of suggesting things that maybe people were not expecting or like they didn't think of.
It's a playfulness as well, right? So it's a tool also, I mean, of course, it's to be taken seriously, because especially if you're going to apply it, you better take color seriously. Because you never know what reactions are going to be to that color. But it is also to play around with, and that is obviously enhancing the creativity of so many people.
I feel so. I feel like everybody can learn and feel like there is something about the tool that I find is almost kind of didactic or playful, as you're saying, that it's like different from someone telling you, okay, this is a split complementary, it works like this. I think it's a more kind of intuitive way, and they feel like they learn something by doing it, and that they find their ways of their own version of beauty. And that's really beautiful. And it's very personal. It becomes one person will go to a different rabbit hole than another one. And I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, because I mean, that's the question that so many clients also ask, of course, like, what is the perfect color combination? That's so difficult because it depends on the atmosphere, but also color is extremely personal. It's very hard, right? To just say, yes, that's not a good combination, or that is a combination that's always perfect. I mean,
I feel like it is very personal. Obviously, there are things you can do to make, I think, good combinations. I have some theories after all these years that I can share, but it's true that, so let's say one thing that I like to do that I've noticed that works, for instance, is like, okay, complementarity, this kind of balance between colors. It is something that we study, and that it does work. It creates a certain balance, maybe because we're using all our cones. There's something there in our eyes that like, oh, this is satisfying. It clicks a little bit. Maybe there's also this relatedness of hues that are very close, and we see like different reds and oranges and pinks or something like that. And you're like, oh, I think it's kind of a thing that, okay, I think it could work. Or colors that are all warm, or that all feel like they're bathing in the same light, or bathing in the same, or sitting in the shade. There's certain techniques that I find works to make combinations that feel more harmonious. And other things don't work so much. Maybe sometimes when you have too many colors, kind of very disparate types of colors, or maybe this vibration we were talking about before, maybe it's very understimulating. It's really too dull. But beyond that, even if I'm working here in the studio and had people over, and I have all these 3 color combinations that I'm working on, and I've tried to make the most beautiful combinations that move me, and I feel they work, and I feel they're gorgeous, and I have people look at them, and some people are like, oh, I love this, and then they have people who someone said like, well, this one reminds me of my text exams when I was a student, so nope, this doesn't work for me. And then they're looking at another one, this is giving me weird uncle vibes, and I'm like, okay. This is very funny.
Has experiences, or even when
so different
color traumas, right? I mean,
totally. And you can't. And I really try to kind of go beyond my preferences and my color traumas, whatever those are. But I feel like that immediate reaction to many people to color, basically because they look at color, they may be not looking at color as often, or they are suddenly exposed to a color combination, and immediately you get that. It's like scent, no? It triggers memory, triggers emotions. So it's, even though I try to do the best job at making the most beautiful combinations, someone might be like, you know what? I will never put that in because it reminds me of that horrible experience I had.
That's true. That's why when you work with clients, it's so important to understand them, who they are. And I mean, not like doing a therapy session. Well, almost. Almost. Color can be a great therapy as well, as I've learned in the past. But yes, you definitely have also been one of those people that has been able to, through all the experience that you have in color, to apply it and support, for example, companies like Google. How are you applying all that knowledge and all that experience to a huge tech company as Google? Like,
I was really lucky that I showed them my work when I moved from Spain to the US, and I showed all these projects, which are all of them, most of them are self-initiated projects, research I did. It's not client work, and they really appreciated that, and I noticed that when I started working, that why it was useful, and in their cases. So I was working more in the first team I worked with, what it was in the Android section. So they would work a lot with screens. It's all it has to do with like the screens and different types of devices. So flat. So and that kind of they also have hardware. So I was more focused on the screen. And I noticed that once I started, I was part of a color team. I was like, oh my God, this is exciting. Color team. So they have people who actually focus on color, but this is crazy. And I would be able to chat with my teammates and be like, I feel like this color could have like 2%, it could be 2% darker or like 2% more saturated. Be like, yeah, you're right. I think this makes a huge difference. They're like, okay, I love talking with you about this, because you can feel like it's so detail oriented and so subtle. And there's so much time put into making things work really well in terms of specifically like usability, making things clear. So making sure that they don't vibrate, they are very comfortable for the user. But they also have this part that, at least now with Google, they really put a lot of emphasis on not just usability, but also feeling and personalization. So they are really putting a lot of energy into creating a sensation of delight for the user, and whatever that is for that person, because you can have options of making things a little bit more soft or more vibrant or more contrastful or more like tonal, like different closer hues. There's all these different kind of recipes that people can apply and apply to their phone. So not only they use the phone as a usable object, but you also have that delightful experience. So I was able to use both kind of that detail oriented, like really perception that you build by looking at color so much, but also work on the beauty part and the aesthetics and that feeling that I'm really interested in, which is that sensation of delight that you really feel in your body. So it was interesting that I've been able to kind of apply both of these things there.
Yeah, I think this is a very positive movement that we are seeing in the industry, where it was obviously it is also about selling. Of course, there's a lot of marketing behind it.
Yeah.
But to actually connect more to the human and the personalization. I think that is a very, very nice movement. I mean, in previous podcasts we talked a lot about neuroaesthetics as well. So I think this tapping into all of the senses, and I think especially because you use color on, let's say, a very high emotional level, I think that is it sounds like a very good match to something that was considered maybe in the past as older. You're moving into the warmer area and you're accompanying these companies.
Yes, it's lovely to be appreciated in that sense and to be useful in that sense, definitely.
You have lived in 6 countries and on different continents in the world. How do you think that has made you who you are? And how, I mean, especially, of course, also on the personal level, which I think is very much obviously of who you are today, also in the world of color, but especially when your view on color.
It's true that it has made me think in a very, I touched upon that for this idea of universality, looking things as a whole, and thinking of looking at all the humans at the same time, and like not. I have friends from all over the place. I don't know. I feel drawn to everyone in a way. So I'm not like I have a bigger view, I find, because of that, because I've been in so many places. And at the same time, I feel that I can appreciate that there's so many facets. It's so multifaceted, and so it can be so different and so personalized. And it really depends on the culture you're in. The place is also intertwined with that culture. So the colors of a culture is also intertwined with the place, like the geography, the light, the color of the earth, the way that, going back to light, I love light, the way that a light that is very bright will really affect how the colors are viewed, more intense, or the way that a softer light may be in the northern country will be more to create softer palettes. Maybe people are drawn to other colors, and it's really fascinating to look at this from that point of view, that every place and culture has their own palette. So it's like a big idea, I like the big global ideas, big, like something that works for most people, and then respecting and being interested and fascinated by all those facets.
Do you miss, so now you live in New York, right?
Yes.
Do you miss places like Casablanca? Do you miss places like Spain when it comes to color and context? Because it's very different, I would imagine.
In terms of color, I would love to go back to Morocco to see it again with new eyes, because I think now I know so much more about color. I would pay much more attention. And Spain, I think it's pretty recent, so I would say I don't miss it that much. And I also brought so many projects. I did so many projects where I take into account the materials there, the light, that I feel like I kind of used it. I took advantage of it. I went, for instance, to Iceland and Japan just to visit these places. I think sometimes, like when you spend a long time, I feel like I don't know. I feel like I miss more places where I spent like a little time. Like I wanted to spend more time and study it more. Like Japan has this beautiful soft light, or like golden, little yellow, almost greenish, very particular. Or Iceland was very different, and the colors of the earth is so impactful and so different. So I feel like I want to go back to places, and I want to go to new places and be like, ooh, what's going on here in terms of color? Really curious.
What is like this? What's like the first thing on your list? What is one of those new places that you really want to go when you think about color?
And in terms of color, well, I do think I want to go back to Iceland a lot. I'm reading this book by Ronnie Horn, the artist who wrote a lot, who spent a lot of time in Iceland and writes beautifully about Iceland, and also writes about the color. And it just makes me feel very inspired, maybe because of the difference, maybe because of that black earth, blackness, and those colors that are so surprising. I'm interested in the Scandinavian countries. I don't know why. And that I think those are kind of the places I would be curious, maybe like, or Denmark or something like that, to see like kind of those beaches, different type of beach than the one I've been exposed to. It's very subtle, and maybe grab a few rocks and be like, okay, what color is this?
It's very simple and very clean, your research. So it's not like going to Copenhagen Design Week and see what's happening. It is
No.
Great Stockholm Design Week. No, it's like going and see nature in those places.
Yes, and obviously also I really like looking at architecture. I did this project here in New York where I studied, I compile all the colors of brownstones. Brownstones are like these kind of row houses that are sitting next side by side. They're made out of kind of a limestone, I think, something like this. That comes from a quarry, came from a quarry from this area, so it has a certain color because of this location. And I loved to annotate the subtlety between the colors of one house to the next. And I find that if I go to a place, there's the nature part that really, to me, it's just I love it. It just it moves me deeply. But there's also this, you can tell, like you can see even in the more human-made environments, that the color, the way it's used, and the color, the way it's applied, the people, there's a lot of information there that's also very exciting to record. I feel like sometimes I'm a documenter. I just like document colors everywhere. I just can't help it.
Yeah, you are definitely on a constant learning path. And I think a lot of people are, but you seem to be constantly looking for something that's new, something that just taps into your curiosity. Now, you create your own projects. Like you said, it's my research. You establish your new color path. What is a project that you are working on, or that you're starting very soon, that maybe you want to share something about?
There's always many projects. I was mentioning before, I have like 3 color combinations here lying down because I'm working on a book. I want to make a book with these 3 color combinations, like a library to share with other people. Who knows? I mean, things can happen. There can be a fire, and all the combinations are going to go away in smoke. So I want to find a way to to share it with others. I find that it really moved me. a lot, and I want to be able to find a way to translate this, at least a part of it. I know that some people might have different reactions, but at least a little bit of that emotional impact it has on me, I want to share it with others, and not just kind of a mix of practical book and also kind of an emotional book. So it's just a very simple book that I wanted to do. I'm working with a designer who does books for galleries. He worked with books for the Joseph Albert's books. So he really knew I would really trust him with the way the color is portrayed, and it's a slow project. We're working slowly, and right now that's one thing that I have going on. Thinking about the sequence, if we're thinking about the combination, because obviously, again, if you put like a few colors together, then I'm putting so three colors, like one group and another group, one under the other. So those two pairs need to work well together. So that's another work. But I love doing this. This is one project that is in process, and another one that was very like spontaneous and actually absolutely not like I guess like all my projects, kind of intuitive. I'm doing a lot of photography, very super like portraits. So we started doing this with me. It was me and my husband. We started fooling around with adding kind of filters or kind of like crystals in front of the camera to kind of distort the image and add color, add kind of fuzziness, kind of a blur, a distortion. We started doing this with ourselves, and then people were like, I want photos. And then I've done, like, mostly me alone, 24 photo sessions in these 2 months. So it's been crazy. It's like, okay, I didn't expect this. And there's something about photographing someone with a kind of a more blurred effect. You like, you can't, that person, it won't be like, oh, I can see this wrinkle, I can see my pore or something like that. It's very just like that idea of the person simplified, and additionally with the colors and the way they move and the smoothness of the transitions, because it's almost, I love like Rothko. Obviously this is great, too much of a big comparison, but there's this softness of the gradients in color combined with that portrayal of a person in a softer way that really creates a mood. And I'm very interested in mood. So this is kind of something that happened. It's happening. I didn't plan it, but it becomes kind of a research of beauty in people and of color and how they're portrayed. And I feel like people see themselves beautifully as well and more comfortable. And it's just a beautiful experience that's related to color and mood that just happened to happen.
You tend to, indeed, things tend to happen, or you just tend to be inspired and you take a new path. You've changed careers a few times already. And I think this is something a lot of people currently, after COVID, during COVID, after COVID, financial crisis that we're in right now, or many crises we are in right now, they can relate to. What would be a tip for the people that are listening for the career path and all those changes that you've made? What is something that has perhaps been consistent, or something that people should think about or try?
Well, I would say one thing that helps is a supportive partner. For those who have one, it is the truth. It having a partner that my husband eventually, like at first he was like, oh, color, what, are you sure about this? And eventually he came around. This idea of being like, okay, I need more time to study this. I think there's something here and having another person to trust you and be like, okay, I'm going to work more and you can focus on this. And then eventually it will come back, and I will find a way to kind of make this sustainable. So that's definitely for those who have that luck and be able to balance and be able to say, okay, or find a way to do that. Maybe have savings, that's time to pause and to think. That's probably what the pandemic gave us. It gave us a time to not do as much, to be bored, and to not have so many appointments, and to not feel like we're missing out on things. And it's kind of became, I find, at least for those who were not affected, obviously, in terms of health, who were lucky to have lived it in a kind of a more positive way, as a way to kind of pause and think, what am I doing? Is this the right path? Is this just, I'm just doing this because I chose this 10 years ago? Is this still something that I find is important to me? So I feel like that space and pause and things that have helped me like to write. And like journal, and things come out through writing. I find that really helps. And I also read this book during the pandemic, which is called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Maybe you're familiar, or any of the audience is familiar with it. And it really works. It's crazy how it's really deep and really shakes you and makes you find things that you want to do, that you're like, I used to do music when I was young. I used to have it kind of more in my life. I used to sing, or I don't know. And then recently was just like, oh, let's go to a karaoke. That was basically what music was. And then I did that book, and then it was like, you have this life. What are the things that you really want to do? What do you want to have in your life? Maybe you don't have to be a professional at everything, but what are the things that you can include in your life that you do regularly? And that's how music came back in my life. And now I have a band with my husband, and we have songs on Spotify. And I was like, oh my God, you would have told me this like a few years ago. I'd be like, what? How does that happen? So I find that it's also a permission to yourself. Sometimes it's not it's an external blockage. I find that sometimes it's like excuses we make for ourselves, or like a kind of internal blockage and that book really helped in that sense. And lastly, I would say it's really like minimizing and pruning and removing things. I was very into minimalism, very like I read all the like Marie Kondo, and then everything else related to minimalism. I was like, oh, I like this. I don't know why. It just felt so liberating, maybe because I've been moving so much, and I wanted to have this kind of lightness and be able to move even more. And I felt like possessions kind of weighted me down. So this pruning and minimizing, it really helped, because we also did that with books and things that really like, or things that remind you of a certain identity or a certain person you were, either professionally or personally. Like maybe you have books about, I don't know, personally, like graphic design or typography. I'm not doing that anymore, but I still have them there. They remind me of what I want. So I think a change in career is not just a change in career, it's really a change in identity. So having that space of being like, okay, removing everything and starting afresh, and be like, what kind of book do I want to buy now? So I started buying books about color, about interiors, about architecture, about interiors. Like, okay, this is what I am now. So it's very interesting to. It's difficult. It's very hard to give away things. It helps to move in a different country. That's for sure. It forces you. You have to. So that was maybe the last thing that's very important. That was very, very useful for me.
Yeah, I tend to think that helps as well. 3 years ago, I was about to move, and then the pandemic happened.
About to.
Didn't move. But I remember that cleanup that I did, and getting rid of things that I truly did not want, or distancing yourself from things that you still, when I do the same thing with my intuition. When something my body leans into, it's a keep. When my body moves away, I'm like, okay,
totally. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's
it's like the color thing. Exactly. It's basically Marie Kondo.
It is, yeah. Although Marie Kondo, I don't think uses a lot of color, but okay.
No, not at all. But I think I felt like it was silly at first. It was like, take it in your hands and see if it like sparks joy. And I was like, oh, okay, it seems very silly, but it actually works. So I feel like it's kind of with color, like, okay, get close to it. Maybe you can touch it, but what do you feel immediately? And listen to that. And interestingly, I find there's kind of this parallel there.
See, your color mood is connected to everything that we do in the end in life. Thank you so much for this conversation, Ruxandra. It's been very interesting to listen to you, and also to the advice that you have given. And I'm very sure there's going to be a lot of people that are going to go to your website and make their color combinations.
That would be, I feel so blessed when people use it for different projects. It's not just like an ego thing of like, oh, I am important, people are using my projects. Really, I feel like it really can like sincerely be useful to people and be delightful. So if anyone wants to reach out or talk about color, I mean, this is a beautiful place to also meet other people who are interested in color. So this was really lovely. And thank you so much for the conversation.
I hope you enjoyed this last episode. If you are a fan of the Color Authority podcast, please let us know by reviewing and rating our show on whichever platform you're listening on. The next episode is coming out next month. And in the meantime, I'm wishing you a wonderful, colorful day.